Hello and welcome to a new episode of How This Indie Dev. Today I have a really interesting guest, Edward Labarca, and I wanted to have you come onto the podcast because you're doing something that's really unique. And I came across your YouTube channel kind of on a random, YouTube rabbit hole trail, but you're combining productivity and time management and game development in a really interesting way. So for those who don't know you, why don't you just take a minute, introduce yourself, and share a little bit about what you're doing.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on this podcast. I'm extremely excited to be here. So this is a great opportunity to just talk about, what game developers do in general. So I am Edward Labarca. I am a new, quote unquote, new game developer. I've started this journey maybe 2-3 years ago, something really light. My background's primarily in mechanical engineering, and I've used to do a lot of engineering type of work. And so over time, I learned how we have to really do a lot of things to make sure that deadlines are always assessed, right? And so one thing that I primarily talk a lot about in my channel is hey, how do we actually get from point A to point B as efficiently and quickly as possible, right? And so there's a lot of engineering terms that I used to study and just really worked on. And most of the time I realized that to really get to that end goal of finishing up whatever project you're going to end up doing, you can only afford to spend the resources on actually getting the most important things done. Everything else either has to get delegated or moved on to something else. And so this is something that was just super essential for my career. And so what happened was I ended up working as a procurement nuclear engineer, which basically meant hey, in a nuclear power plant, you're making sure that everything's working and that the components don't break. Thought that was a really boring, terrible job. I was I don't want to do this at all. And it's funny because during that time, that's actually when I first picked up Unity, which was, again, maybe 2-3 years ago, 2.5 maybe. And I was hey, this is a really cool, way to program, to make your video games and such. And I was hey, this is something I'd like to do. Which is funny because growing up, I always wanted to make games. I always thought game development was such a really cool, interesting career that one person could do. But I was always hyper intimidated about the fact that it's probably not, I don't want to say not profitable, but it's a very risky career at the end of the day. There's a bunch of things that you have to manage, and it's not really confirmed that you're going to have the results that you want on your first game. And so with all that advice, I realized I'm not going to listen to my advice here, and I'm going to actually quit my job and then start making games. And this was easily one of the most terrible decisions of all time because, for context, this is the first time I'm picking up Unity. So I have zero game design background. I used to prototype a lot of video games in Little Big Planet 2, which basically had a level editor. And so I thought, yeah, that should be enough. It was not enough. So I attempted to do full game dev completely on my own, just running on my savings and such for about a year. And I realized, hey, this is no, I definitely made a mistake here. I should have probably planned things out a little bit more. But I actually did end up releasing my first commercial game, Dodge King version 1, within 3 months, actually. And going back to the whole engineering career stuff, it's the fact that this was only possible if we really, really focus on what actually needs to be done in the development cycle. And so when I launched the game, I didn't sell that many copies. It's not a commercial success. It's hey, it didn't work out, right? But putting the game out commercially allowed me to put it in my portfolio, which allowed me to actually get a job at a game studio located in Puerto Rico. For there, I was working as a Unity developer for an entire year, and currently I'm doing software engineering at a different company. Just constantly learning programming, constantly learning more tactics, and again, more engineering, how do I get from point A to point B? But at the same time, I'm doing game dev on the side. And recently, and I think this is how you ran into my channel based on the conversation that we were talking about, I said, what if I remade Dodge King again from scratch in 90 days? So I proposed the challenge of, okay, based off of the game design experience that I have now, that, I elevated over the year, or year and a half in this case, and then just applying all of those practices of trying to complete projects as soon as possible, what can I do to actually make this, how can I complete this game quicker? So in 90 days, I redid Dodge King, and currently it's out again as the same title. It's also known as Dodge King Deluxe. And this is just simply proof that, hey, the game, any game or any project that you want to do or work on absolutely can be done really quickly. There are some sacrifices you're going to have to make in order to, adjust that time management part, but absolutely, I believe that's possible, and I want to continue making proof that that is going to be the case for the next pile of games that I'm going to end up making and publishing and moving on forwards. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's my little introduction, right? So
that's amazing. I really liked your YouTube channel. You have less than 2,000 subscribers right now, I think. And
yeah.
What I really like about your content is you emphasize how game developers can be more productive with their time and development processes, which is super needed in the game dev sphere, because a lot of people are making games on evenings and weekends and trying to maximize their time. Like all of the game devs that I talk to, it's like their number one thing. They're like, how do I find more time? And there's a lot of like self-help and productivity tips that people like put out into the internet. But what I really liked about your videos and what you are putting out on YouTube is that you put it into practice. Like you said, you demonstrated it in making a game in 90 days and launching it on Steam. So I'm hoping for our conversation today, you know, we can dive into a lot of the specifics that you talk about with like time management, productivity, habits, focus, like your game dev strategy, and your personal growth mindset. So I have a lot of questions, but I know you mentioned you had some questions for me as well. So I'll make sure that, you know, feel free to ask me any questions as we go.
Awesome.
And we can leave some time at the end too, if you want to just make sure that we hit everything. But yeah, let's jump into it.
All right. So I actually wanted to ask you this like number one question before we even like get through everything. And so yeah. You're sitting at an extremely interesting position. And so I really like the content that you've been producing, and I've been watching a lot of it recently, and I'm like, okay, this developer has a lot going on. But the number one thing I'm just super curious to know, hey, you're currently doing indie dev full-time, and you're basically working with a lot of mysterious factors, a lot of unknowns, right? I specifically remember that you started porting your games recently, and that's probably been like a really cool process and a lot of things to come about. But as a full-time developer working in the unknown, right, how do you manage time, right? What are the strategies or tactics you use to say, hey, I don't know how to do this particular aspect yet, but I'm going to put a deadline, or maybe I'm going to approach it this way? Yeah. Because at the end of the day, when you do have to, you know, work on these endeavors, you have a time limit at the end of the day. You have, you know, kind of that burn rate that you have to deal with, and just all these other factors to consider, right? Mm-hmm. So I've been super genuinely curious how you handle that, and, you know, I want to start off with that.
Yeah. Okay. So my situation is interesting because in my mind, my game development journey has like 3 major periods of time in it. And the first one was when I first started getting into game development, and I was trying to go through a bunch of tutorials and learn all of the technical skills and figure out how Unity works and all of that. You know, it's like typical like hobbyist game developer sort of mentality, where I would clock off my job during the day, and then I would spend some time after dinner and on the weekends, you know, just trying to like put together some prototypes. So that was like phase 1. And then phase 2 was, I guess you could slice it a few different ways. But I'll just jump to when I started going full time. So then it was like, okay, phase 2 is like, I am doing this full time, and now I'm in complete control of my time. And so it's like this big beast of like, okay, I have 24 hours in a day, and I am in charge of all of it. How do I allocate everything that I want to do? And then there was me after my daughter was born, which is phase 3. And so that kind of like everything that I learned in phase 1 and phase 2, I got to phase 3, and it was like somebody just threw a wrench in all the cogs. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I juggle like this human being that needs my attention, and like doing childcare, and like making sure that me or my wife or one of our family members is watching the baby, and like doing game development, you know, and like all of this stuff. So that's kind of how I think about it, is it in 3 terms. But what's interesting to me is that I was never really interested in productivity or like time management or anything like that until I started getting into game development. Game development was the catalyst for me to start approaching my calendar in a more intentional way. And that's because, you know, by default, I'm kind of a laid back guy. But when I realized that there was more that I wanted to get out of my time, I realized that I had to treat it like a system and optimize it. Sorry, that's a lot of precursor. Your original question was, what exactly? How do I approach time management as a full-time dev?
Yeah, especially in those mysterious zones. But please keep going. This is really interesting because you are, and I'm going to tag back on this later, because breaking your learning phases, as in like where you started learning, into the full-time and then balancing the actual family aspect is so critical, which I can see why it's so important to, you know, have time management like in your forefront, right? But please continue. Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the way, and I have tried so many different things, both with managing projects and also trying to like squeeze time out of my schedule. As far as like squeezing time out of my schedule, I've tried like waking up early, like eat lunch while I'm working, go to bed late, like all of these different things. But when it comes to actually like setting deadlines and figuring out, especially as a solo developer, okay, because I tell people all of my deadlines are arbitrary. Like nobody is impressing deadlines on me. And so you would think that maybe that would be a great thing because then you don't have any pressure. But really I have a lot of other pressures, which is like how much income am I bringing in, which isn't, it is directly tied to deadlines for things, but not exactly. It's like when I get my next YouTube video isn't going to like affect a lot of things because YouTube doesn't bring in much revenue for me. It's all game sales right now. So, lost my train of thought. But like, so the issue with setting my own deadlines for releasing games is that I set a deadline, and if I hit it, then I move everything forward. And Correct. If I don't hit it, then I feel like I'm behind. But since even if I hit a deadline, I move everything forward, or if I'm fast, I move everything forward, I'm in this chronic state of always feeling like I'm behind on things, which is kind of a sucky place to be at. But I have noticed that, as I set deadlines, I try and stuff more than I can accomplish into a single day. And even if I don't meet it, it pushes me to be more productive than I would be if I tried to set more feasible goals. So that's kind of how I approach it.
Absolutely the most important part here. And so, not to interrupt here, but
yeah.
One thing that I talk about in probably every single video I'm going to be uploading for the rest of my channel, Parkinson's Law. Mm-hmm. And so all this basically means is you're just allocating your time in a shorter amount of space so that you're able to be more productive. And the crazy part is, you can say, oh, I have the pressure of, trying to be financially stable, or I have other pressures external, such as family and such. But the beautiful part of the deadline as a whole is that if you respect the deadline, right? If you say, I'm going to actually make sure I do everything in my power to make sure that this happens, then suddenly the deadline is going to be the confirmation date of when you actually finish everything. And so if you say, oh, I'm going to go ahead and not set a deadline, or I'm just going to go ahead and develop in this like, I don't want to use the word easy, but in this free flow state where you're just kind of like pushing items and features until something comes up, what's going to happen is you're going to end up running in this endless cycle where, yeah, you're making features, you're probably polishing your game, but you're not reaching an end goal. And by you not doing that, you're just going to end up wasting a lot of time, resources, energy. And I think the craziest part about this as a developer is that end of the day, you're making games so that players can actually like enjoy your game and such, right? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes we kind of have this limited foresight where we're creating these features that really don't matter because we're not either playtesting, we're not getting the feedback, or we're kind of like, and I don't want to be rude or something, but maybe we're too stuck on our own minds thinking like, oh, well, I need to have this feature because this is exactly what my game's going to be. But you have to have that flexibility of understanding exactly what the player wants and then combining all your resources to make sure that that occurs. And so super interesting that you're mentioning that, hey, like, you're pushing your deadlines forward every single time that you make progress, which that's absolutely amazing. If anything, you're going to get more production done as a result of doing that. And so one more question that I had for you here was in regards of doing that. Yeah, we feel like we're always behind. We always feel like, it's always like overwhelming and such. But is there something that you do where, once you push things forward, do you take like a small little break? Do you reward yourself? Because one other thing is that it's so easy to say, yeah, just put the deadline, keep going back and forth and such, right? But burnout is a real thing as well. And so if I constantly asked you, hey, make this game in a month and then do it again in another month and then do it again in another month, you could. But also there's that part where you have to also take care of yourself as well, right? Yep. So out of pure curiosity, is there like small breaks that you end up taking every now and then?
Yes and no. I probably wouldn't. I don't use like a good reward system for my own workflow. What I usually do is I try and keep everything in balance. So the hard thing is that like I follow a lot of game developers that they are giving it their all. They are like pursuing the indie dream and they are grinding themselves into the ground doing it. I don't know if you saw Thomas Brush recently posted a video with Julian, who made Lens Island, and that guy literally had a heart attack because he was grinding so hard making this game. And since then, you talk to him, and he's like, "Yeah, I I eat better, I exercise every day, and he's kind of mellowed out into, he's still productive when he needs to be, but he's trying to take a holistic approach to his life, which I think is really wise. And similarly, I cannot elevate game development into like the number one spot in my life, primarily
Exactly.
because I have a family, and like that's always going to be, everything is going to be subservient to that. And so because of that, I also have to think, okay, how can I be a good husband? How can I be a good father? And a lot of that is just trying to balance things, which I don't get right. And I go through these seasons of, okay, I've kind of put too much effort here, and then I put too much effort here, and I'm always trying to like teeter-totter around that. But I found that getting outside, exercising, I like going for a run with my dog, going on hikes, those kinds of things really help me to clear my head and keep me from burnout. But I don't necessarily do like a whole like reward structure for if I meet my deadlines. So.
And actually, I'm very grateful that you're able to kind of open up with that, because it is so true. And maybe this is like a harsh take, right? But it's like, if you truly want to do something great, you're going to have to throw balance outside of the window. And so I think that's really the hard part of things, because yes, ideally, if we were to live like a very balanced lifestyle, then yeah, you would go to work, then you would spend your free time making your game, and then maybe like 1 or 2 hours hanging out with the friends and such. I think one of the most controversial pieces of advice that I've said in my channel before is like, hey, you should learn how to limit your hangout sessions, right? For example. Yep. And that's controversial because yes, like we're human, we're supposed to be social, we're supposed to like have friends and hang out and such. And I'm not saying don't, like not have friends, right? Like it's super important to, have your moments of rest and stuff. Yep. But the idea, or trying to like drill the point here, is that there's a lot of sacrifices that need to be made when you really want to try to be as effective as possible. Yep. And so the craziest part about game dev is that we're really wearing a lot of hats. Sometimes you're a designer. Sometimes you are a salesperson. The next day, you're now trying to argue on Twitter, or like trying to make a funny meme because you have to market something. Like there's so many things that you have to do. And so the quality of each task that you're working on has to be assessed at its highest standard in order to make sure that your game sells and is productive, gets the feedback, reaches the right audience. And so it's very difficult for a indie developer, like a solo one-person indie developer, to have balance in their life when they're doing games. At the same time, I can't advertise and tell you, oh yeah, put games above everything else, because you have a life. The other thing that I also want to mention is that part of what makes like good time management and good games in general, in my personal opinion, is that as a developer, the best parts of development are beyond what's actually happening in the game, right? And what I mean by this is like, yeah, you can program, you can make art, you can do this, you can do that, but you really have to think about, okay, what is the type of connection you're making with the players when they play the game? What are the lessons you as a designer are learning so that you not only make a good game, but your next game is even better? What are the things that you're learning? What are the personal growths that you have so that maybe one day in the future you share those lessons, the same way how you're doing this podcast and letting people know like, hey, these are the things that we're doing, right? Like there's a bunch of brilliant things that come out of this. And so there are going to be seasons that, we're going to have to just put our heads down. Maybe for 90 days, you're absolutely just a hermit. You're not socializing. You're just doing everything possible. But then, maybe give yourself some grace. And then, yeah, like maybe the next 10 days afterwards, you can kind of take it easy and such. But also, the other thing that you mentioned that I absolutely agree with is that game development should be viewed as a system, right? And so it's super fun if you view it as a hobbyist and you want to take your time and learn. I have absolutely no beef with that. I think that's a really good approach. But if this is something that you want to make profitable, if this is something that you want to work as a career and such, you need to systemize it so that you're optimizing all your resources. Yep. Time is one of the resources that we're going to continue talking about here, but this also includes how you spend, manage, and burn your money. This also talks about how you're getting your assets, how you're delegating, how you're dealing with all of these, tributes to keep building your game. Yep. And so it's crazy hearing the story about the developer who had a heart attack, because it's true. Like there are times where we truly push ourselves really deeply, but then we have to take a step back and ask, like, okay, like, and again, not to criticize here, but it's like that's a lot of work that you end up doing. And I guess like one thing that I really want to like kind of drill down here is that one of the things that us developers tend to kind of mess up on, and I'm super guilty about this, is that we'll work on a feature over and over and over again, when at the end of the day, that feature may not even matter. And so the whole point that I'm trying to get to is that, there's so many things, so many responsibilities, and just a sheer plethora of things that we just have to do to get a game done. And so time management is something that we should start putting more in our forefront in order to avoid having this endless cycle of like, okay, well, I'm just going to keep building until something happens. Yeah. No, we should have an endpoint, and that way we can start, kind of not re-allowing balance again, but, have that little like, okay, well, for this season, I'm going to do this. Next season, I'm going to do that. Then this season, I can go ahead and perform this. And circling back to your phases, I think it's brilliant that you mentioned that as well, because the first phase that every developer has to go through is learning how to develop.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to take time. How much time does it take? Completely depends up to you, but that's why it's called tutorial hell, because sometimes we just do it endlessly, but we don't know when we stop. Mm-hmm. The second phase is when you say, you know what, let me sit down and actually make the commercial game. And then the third step is, okay, what does life have to say, right? Do you have the family that happens? Does your game become a commercial success? Does it become a commercial failure, and now you have to reassess what you have to do? So many things that you have to observe. So, end of the day, you really want to pick and choose how you use your time. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? What are the habits? What are the actual like technical things that you have to do to achieve that? This is where I start talking a little bit more about like my channel and such, right? Mm-hmm. But I really think that it all starts with habits. And I guess before I begin breaking down some habits here, I kind of wanted to know more on your end here. You probably have habits that are already well established. You have, I believe, a really good calendar where you're looking at it every single day saying, okay, I got to take this task now and then I have to do that. What are your top 3 habits that you personally use on your day-to-day basis when it comes to, okay, I'm going to develop, or I'm going to design, or I'm going to take a break, or I'm going to do this? How do you do that on your end?
I feel like I have a very imperfect system, and I'm constantly not happy with it. And so I'm trying new things all of the time. And this has been a process that I've been using over years and years. One thing that is a complete non-negotiable is a to-do list. And so once I downloaded a to-do list app, I've been using it religiously for years and years. So to-do list is the number one, like, it's a game changer because it takes things out of my head and I can put it down on paper or an app and just forget about it. I can set deadlines, but mostly it's just for me to brain dump so that I don't have to keep it all in my head. That's number one. There's a bunch of other stuff that I've tried. I made a YouTube video about waking up at 5 a.m. every day, which, I was actually very productive in that time because it allowed me to get a lot of work done before I started my day job. But long term, I didn't have good enough sleeping habits so that I don't think it worked out for me then. Now, because of my baby, I'm up at 6 a.m. or earlier every day. So, I just go to bed early. And I know that you support setting an alarm to go to bed instead of setting an alarm to wake up, which I thought was really, really interesting and practical. And from my own experience, I think that just makes a lot of sense. Other things that I've tried like time blocking on my calendar, like trying to set up blocks of time so that I know what is going to be every ounce of my day, what it's going to be spent doing. I didn't love that. The problem is that a lot of these systems that I've tried have had less payoff than the amount of effort that I set up. And so I'm trying to reduce overhead, especially as an indie developer. You don't have a lot of communication with teammates or anything. I'm making all of the decisions myself, so I'm trying not to spend too much time on project management. I've used Trello, I've used Jira, I've used ClickUp, I've used all of these different organization and project management tools. One thing that I have been using lately that I really like is a time tracking tool. And there's not even any outcome for that, but it's just for me to see the data of, oh, this is how much time I spent making YouTube videos this week. Oh, this is how much time I spent coding on this game. This is how much time I spent porting my game to Nintendo Switch, and then I can see in these buckets how everything has divvied up. And then the goal is that once I have a lot of that data, I can go back and say, okay, what's actually affecting the bottom line? I put X many hours into the Nintendo Switch port. It earned me this many thousands of dollars. Was that like a good investment? All this stuff.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to think.
I do think that tracking the metrics is like one of the most important things out there because, like you said, not only helps support the data to see like what's going on, but you get to see the returns of what each action actually does.
Yeah.
And so that's super genius. And just out of curiosity, what was the tracking software that you used for that?
I use Toggle.
Toggle. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm familiar with F-Track, which is almost like the same thing, but you just click the. I don't use it anymore, and so actually the other thing I was going to mention here is that I am like very against using software tools that just distract you from just inputting the most basic things out there.
Yeah.
But like it's absolutely like for the context of working with teams and such, absolutely it is important to see what everyone's doing and such, and tracking that is good. But as an individual, and I think what's interesting about this is that my approach or like my methodology for how I work with game design and like how I start building and everything comes down to really 3 steps, right? And the first one is, and I've used this word a billion times, which is endpoint, right? It's what is the end goal? What does it look like? What is the ending that you're trying to get to? And so I would heavily suggest or like advise for anybody that wants to make a game from the ideation process, right? Like, okay, I want to do this. I want to try that. Where do I start? Start at the end. And the reason why I say this so much is because you want to really spend probably like, I don't want to give an arbitrary time, like, oh, spend a week, spend a day, but like just spend time putting, like, crafting up that, okay, this is how it's going to look like, this is what it's going to feel like, these are all the features, but then start listing out precisely what you need. So what I did for Dodge King, for example, right, is I said, okay, this is going to be a grid-based bullet hell roguelike. It's going to be kind of very simple with simple controllers and such. It's probably going to have not that many enemies, not that many characters, but it's going to have like a lot of interactions that you can have. And I would literally list every single menu that I would need, attack that I would have, and obviously it becomes a draft, and then you have to polish the draft and such. And this is also kind of the craziest form of getting player feedback as early as possible, because even though it's just a draft, even though it's literally words on a Google Doc, you can still talk to your friends. You can talk to people that are in a Discord. You can talk to your community. You can post it online and say, hey, like, this is what my game ideally looks like. What do you guys want to see added? What do you guys want to see removed? And so once that is as crystal clear as possible, and this is kind of like the loophole. This is kind of like, okay, here's the secret. Once you have that crystal clear, that's it. All you have to do is build your game doing exactly what you just said. And so the beauty about this is that you don't spend time working on other features that you don't need. You don't need to cut content because you made a feature that didn't work and then you have to slash it out later. You literally just focus on all of the things that are readily available. And so going back to the engineering background, the reason why this is so... This could be a difficult task to do at first, and this is something that some developers probably need practice with. Because I remember when I was doing the first Dodge King, I just kind of said, oh, well, let me just, shoot things on the wall and see what sticks, right? And again, terrible quality. I got some really bad feedback because they're like, hey, this game kind of sucks. I'm like, okay, I made a mistake, but I have to start somewhere, right? The thing is, with the deluxe version, I made sure to be hyper crystal clear on what needed to be done so that when I started the 90-day run, I could deliver not only all the features that I said I was going to go and work for, but also deliver it at the highest quality possible. Because it's one thing to make a game in 90 days versus making a game in 90 days with actually like, hey, this actually works. This is what players approve of, right? If you look at a game jam, for example, right? You can make a game in 3 days, in a weekend, in, hours if you needed to. But does that translate to high quality? Does that translate to actually making sure that it's good? This is why player feedback is so important, even at the drafting stage. So once you have that ready, you can do phase 2, which is tackling each possible, feature, right? Mm-hmm. And this is where the habits come in. This is where the time management part comes in. And so it's really funny because I really think that, we say, oh, if you want to have like good time management, you have to be like hyper focused, right? And controversially, I think that's incorrect. I actually think that you don't have to be focused because I don't think focus is a skill. More importantly, I just think you have to get rid of your distractions. And so this means your environment. This means making sure you're working on the actual, code instead of like, oh, but let me try this like new color palette because, it's a little, like any little distraction. It could be like the simplest thing out there. That 1% is going to absolutely change your deadline. Mm-hmm. And this is why it's so critical to make sure that you have a crystal clear endpoint document of like what needs to be done. Because once you have that, okay, I need to make a menu system. Well, I'm going to spend the next 6 hours doing that. Oh, by the way, if I can do it earlier, then guess what? I push all my deadlines earlier, and then I can just work on the next thing. Okay, menu's done. What else? Settings. Okay, I'm going to do settings. Okay, now I need the player stuff. You integrate more player feedback. You integrate more player tests. You go back and forth, right? But it really, really, truly comes down to just the airtightness of making sure that you're not doing anything else but said feature or list that you're working on. And so this is also where I see, and again, I'm the most guilty person with this, because before Dodge King, I was working on another game called Another Chance at Happiness, which it's a grid-based bullet hell twin stick shooter, right? So I'm a huge fan of Mega Man Battle Network and Star Force, and basically I said, hey, what if this game was like a twin stick shooter? So I made a huge prototype for that, and I remember every day going into it like, okay, what am I going to do today? Well, I don't know, but, it would be cool if I added this monster, and then I would start working on the art, and I don't import it, then test it, and like, oh, well, I didn't like that frame, so I'm going to go back. I wasted, I wouldn't say wasted, because, yeah, it's a learning experience, and technically I do have the prototype ready, but it took me maybe, a year and a half of just experimenting with the same thing over and over and over again, and it's crazy, because that's a year and a half worth of work. Where's the game? Right, like it's not on Steam, it's not playable on my itch page. Like it's just like, hey, like it's just there in the background. And so the lesson that I learned there is, wow, it's really fascinating, because there is a fun component in game development. You're basically doing challenges that are unique. They really test how you're able to imply your creative will into like a project and a game and such. And so the fun part, in my opinion, is like you're just building. But then what happens is, again, if you treat it like a hobbyist, you're just going to keep building endlessly without, making sure that it's going to have some sort of end. And because I recognized, okay, my game that I absolutely love, that it's super fun, this and that, hey, man, like, it's going to take forever if I keep treating it with this attitude. And so that's why I proposed the idea of, like, okay, what can I do to get this straight? And so if we're reverse engineering the endpoint, to say, okay, well, let's do all these things to make sure that we make all these features on time and this and that. Why can't we reverse engineer our habits, our time management, our other aspects of life that allows us to maximize the time? And I think the funniest comment that I ever received was there's a video I made called Powerful Habits on How to Make Games Quickly. That's where I talk about going to bed early and everything. At the time, the top comment was, oh, this is game dev maxing. And I'm like, yeah, we're min-maxing time, and that's literally all it is. But that can only be done in a vacuum if we're able to actually have the list of things that we need to accomplish. Again, the big takeaway of all of this is that the more distractions you have, the more, like items that just make you look left or right, even by like 1 degree, it's over. Any difference of not respecting that deadline, that end line, that airtight, like it has to be there. That's what focus is. It's not about doing it quickly, doing it efficiently, because fun fact, there's going to be a lot of features that you're going to work on that demand more time, that demand more quality. And so, for example, in Dodge King, we have an upgrade system. So every time you dodge a couple of times in a row, you are presented with upgrades that you can choose. But in concept, that took probably like, I'm not going to lie, like probably 4 hours to make something super simple, right? But the 4-hour version was dirty, it was unclean, it was very ghetto, it was like, this looks so programmer art, right? So I had to spend an extra day or two, actually I probably spent like 4 days just making artwork that actually like looked really good, that got approval from players, and that feature has more weight to possibly all the other features in the game, because, it's called Dodge King, you want to get rewarded for dodging, right? So if that's the most important part, then I have to double down on that. So even though that was going to take more time to do, that didn't mean I had to rush to finish it. This simply meant, okay, I just need to allocate my time here more effectively to make sure that I have everything set. That doesn't mean, oh, let me do something else in the meantime. No, that's, okay, do this until it's done. Is it done? Okay, move on to next. Not done? No, keep going. Yep. And that's the premise of focus. No distractions. That's literally the premise of how you can do time management in anything. Put the list, get to the endpoint, don't be, stay focused, don't distract yourself, and then the third part, right, and real quick, is just making sure that, hey, does the player like it? Does it actually align with your vision, with what they want? If not, make the adjustments that are necessary to make sure that players like it. If you don't do that, what are you building the game for? It's cool to say, oh, I'm making the game for myself, but like, let's be real, we're doing this as a system for a reason. So those are the 3 things I would say that you need to do to absolutely make sure that you're getting your game done in time. Is that something by theory, is that something that you might follow? Is that something that you relate
100%. to? Yeah. I think it's so interesting hearing you go through it and articulate it like that. It makes me very grateful for my background in software engineering, because all of the project management stuff that have been drilled into me through the different jobs that I've had over the years align with this, and now I just do them by habit. For instance, we have to-do lists for tasks that we want to get done in the project, and so we start by outlining, okay, what do we want done in the next 2 weeks? And then you go from this is to do, and then you can move it over to in progress, and then you QA it, and then you move it over to done.
Yep.
And then you get in trouble if you have more than one task in the in progress section. And that's something that I don't even think about anymore. And I'm like, yeah, I use Git as version control for all of my projects. And I don't do this anymore, but when at my day job, I would use the ticket number in the Git commit message so that it was very easy to tell these changes in the project correlate to this task in our project management software. And so that made it very clear to say, like, if I'm changing something that doesn't have to do with that task, then something is wrong. And so it kept me laser focused. And that's very interesting to think about. And I guess like something that I take for granted now because I had so much of that drilled into me from different jobs that I've had over the years.
And you know what's so funny about that, and this is such a software engineering thing, like super quickly, is that you probably worked with what's called requirements, right? So what that means is, hey, like you have this task, you cannot complete this task until it fulfills these exact requirements, right?
Yep.
And so that's literally all it is. Your distractions are anything outside of the requirement. And by the way, what's hilarious is that as a software engineer, if you disrespect that, if you just go outside the bounds, you're going to get your managers calling you like, hey, why'd you add that line of code? That has nothing to do with the project. You're absolutely like messing up the thing. And so maybe like you said, it's probably the habitual reinforcement of like, oh, well, this is what I did in my day job, so now I'm just translating that into game dev. And yeah, that's probably what it is. But also, if we take another step back, you'll realize that all of these software engineering companies with all these projects and such already have that definition of what the project needs to have before they employ the developer to actually write and build the code and such. And so the interesting part as a game dev is that you are in charge of your own company. You're in charge of your own project. You're in charge of all of these big decisions. And so it's about you delivering that as a professional software engineer who is a marketer, who's also a salesperson, who's also a teacher, who's also, like you have to just, again, combine all these hats at the end of the day.
Totally. Yeah. And I'm curious, this is one of the questions after watching some of your videos that I wanted to ask you is that because like in software development, you have very clear requirements. Usually it's like, go fetch this data from the database and then filter it and go get the, and it's like you can write unit tests for it. Like you can do all of these things to make sure that it is objectively done and the requirements are met. For game development, it's a bit different because the requirement at the end of the day is fun, or you're trying to evoke some sort of mood. If it's like a horror game, then you want to like evoke like something that's not necessarily fun, but like, you know what I mean? It's much more in the realm of the subjective realm. And something that you talk about in your videos a lot is not moving the goalposts. You pick your endpoint and you don't want to move it because then you'll just keep pushing it back, which I agree to. But I'm interested to, I agree with that. But I'm interested to hear, how do you iterate on when the goalposts do need to move, or like maybe you implement something and you think it's done, but you're not really sure. Like maybe it's just not fun enough, but it is done. Like how do you take that sort of like squishy requirements of game development, and when do you iterate in the name of fun?
This is so interesting because just like you said, it's subjective. And part of the challenge of game development is that we just don't know what like if I asked you, hey, what is peak fun? Like everyone's going to have a completely different answer. And this is why we have genres. This is why we have a bajillion games that exist. Like peak fun is there's no such thing. And so what I will say is that from a design perspective, this is why the prototype has to be ugly. It has to be ugly. It has to be like what I'm saying is you cannot spend time polishing the artistic stuff of the prototype and such, because what happens is you're just not allocating the correct time, right? So in the time management sense, it has to be ugly. That's why I said the upgrade machine, the upgrade system has to be ugly, whatever. But the reason why we do this is because this is where we integrate play testing and player feedback as soon as possible. It should be just like the draft, the very first thing you ever do, because here even though everything's subjective and such, you will get a vibe, you will get a feel of what the players are feeling. It's like, okay, hey, I like how I move. Hey, this bullet looks ugly. Okay, I'll let the bullet stay ugly. But like, do you like how you move? Do you like how you attack? Is the countering nice? Do you have the, if I gave you this assortment of new weapons, like, will you experiment with that? Will you play with that? Does it interact the way that I need it to? And so this is why we have to really, really start having the habit of just like making sure that playtesters are actively playing the game as often as possible, because they're going to be your number one source of feedback that truly makes you understand if your game is fun or not. Now, crazy, because if I said, okay, well, this is the document, I cannot move the goalpost at all. And so I just need to make sure that the game is fun, but also I just made it super clear that I've basically made a cement-proof, sidewalk. Like, I can't move this. Like, it has to be fun no matter what. And so what's interesting about this process is that any feature that you want to add, change, remove, redesign, it has to be, and I think this is maybe controversial, right? But this is what I've been learning. You can make a lot out of a little. And what I mean by this is that if your idea can be validated in the prototype, then okay, that's good. But what if the player plays through your prototype after, 2 months of development and they're like, this is not fun, this and that? You would be genuinely surprised that all you have to do are the smallest tweaks possible to actually, like, those small optimizations that the player is asking for. We may not know exactly what it is because it kind of depends on the genre. It depends on, like, again, what the game is actually going to be about. But this is why the more feedback you get, the more likely you're going to find out, okay, well, I'm moving it, for example, in Dodge Game, I'm moving it a grid, okay? How do I know if that's fun, right? Like, how do I measure that? And by the way, I'm not going to change the grid movement because I'm super cemented on the fact that this is what has to be done. Otherwise, I'm not going to publish it on time. So what happened was when I was talking to playtesters, I said, hey, okay, so how do you feel about the grid? Is it fast? Is it slow? Do you feel awkward when you're using, like, the joystick? Is there something that could be better? What do you actually feel about it? And at first, a lot of people felt neutral about it. And so I'm like, okay, so that's an okay response, but I want positive. I want something that's like, oh, how do I make this even better? And so what I remember talking to one playtester, he specifically said, hey, it would be cool if you showed me, he kind of worded it like the limit of like how much I can move. And I was like, okay, that's a little weird. But I really didn't understand that at the time. But after going back and forth with him, I realized, hey, super simple fix. What if I added a little warning sign about, like, bullets about to come into you and everything, and you're on the warning sign, and if you move out of the warning sign, you get rewarded for doing that. And so that one super micro change allowed to improve the dodging system. So now, yeah, you can dodge attacks, you can dodge this and that, but now the grid movement as a whole complements the dodging system because of the fact that the players were telling me, like, hey, like, this is neutral, we got to do something. What is that something? Whatever it is, it has to be small. It has to be a micro optimization. And so what I find very fascinating about game jam games specifically is that you can see the developers prototyping their games super quickly. It's a 2-day game development. It could be a weekend, it could be a whole week, maybe a month, right? But you have to wonder, hey, they don't have time to build all these cool machines, all these things that they have to. How do they actually make something super fun? And it's just that at the end of the day, micro optimizations. What are the small key things that you already have in your game that you can do to make it fun? And here's the crazy part. I would say it's okay if like, let's say your game's going to take 3 months to build, this and that. Obviously, you want it to be fun and everything. But let's say you recognize, okay, this is going to take like a very long time for me to find that micro optimization. Don't worry about it. Finish the game. Listen to the feedback. See if you can, discover what you can do to make that micro optimization. If you never find it, do it on the next game. Plan everything carefully. And the other thing that I really want to mention here is that, yeah, micro optimization is important, but it only matters when you learn why it works. So if I learned, okay, the dodging system was more fun because it got closer to the player risk reward psychology part that, like, makes people like playing those type of games. Well, now I know for the next game, the next effort, the next project that I do, I need to incorporate that first. And so the greatest part about game development as a whole, and something that we need to practice more often, is that we have to grow in increments. Your first game is, if you're lucky, and if your first game sells 1 million copies, like, absolutely congrats, like, good for you, right? But realistically speaking, it's always going to be an incremental grind. So if you know how to make these optimal, super small changes for a game that may not be fun, but then suddenly with 1 or 2 changes you made it fun, what would happen when you design the next game to have these features in mind, and then you kept on micro optimizing that? over time, you're going to naturally make more games that are just naturally more fun, more compelling, and then, you're going to have players that appreciate that and such. But interesting, but that's a really good question. And just to recap here, so how do you make something fun when you don't have the time or you can't move the goalpost, right? And some developers will move the goalpost to do this, because yes, fun is the most important part. I absolutely agree. But my philosophy is find those micro optimizations, do it so that it fits the deadline, and then once you're done, and if you really have that regret of it could have been more fun, it could have been this, use your next game to build on it. Mm-hmm. And by the way, your next game doesn't have to be 3 months. It could now be 5 months, because now you have more knowledge, more tools, more assets, this and that. Yep. So, it's all arbitrary dates at the end of the day. Yep. But really, really, really focus on what the player is saying. Focus on the small things you can do. And again, you can do a lot with a little. That's the key thing that you have to remember as a developer.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I also want to ask you, because something that I really like about your YouTube videos is that they're very concrete and very practical. They're not feel good about give you a boost of motivation after watching this video. It's very what can I do tangibly that will help me save time? And so you've done stuff set an alarm to go to bed. You talk about exercise routines and how you don't need to spend 2 hours at the gym to get good exercise and to stay fit. You talk about batching chores and doing meal prepping, saying no to social events, discipline with social media and removing distractions and using small chunks of time here and there. I'm interested to know what does your life look like day to day? Because a lot of the things that you talk about in your videos are very helpful, but also kind of extreme. Most people don't live their lives like that. Do you find yourself where you're do you follow all of your own advice, or do you feel like you have a really regimented life, or is this something that you learned and enacted only when you were doing your 3-month development window for Dodge King, or what does it look like in a day in the life of Edward?
Definitely a mix of both right now. So the thing is, for the sprint of the 90 days, absolutely, I went hermit mode. I said, I listen, love my friends, love everything, but I can't go out. I have to absolutely make sure that this is done. And yeah, I understand why that's such a controversial take, because it's hey, you're in that context, it feels like you're putting game development first over everything, which yeah, and to some extent that's kind of the case that happened. But also there are, I would say 24 hours is a lot of time, is what I'm saying. Because even though it was hyper extreme and everything, there still were Sunday mornings where I said, hey, I'm going to go ahead and do some responsibilities. Or maybe there's that one Thursday night where it's okay, well, it's just an hour if I, get some ice cream with a friend or something like that. Of course, it may appear extreme and such, which I understand it does. But it doesn't mean that if you enact this lifestyle 24/7, you're going to be deprived of what life is offering and everything. You can absolutely do a lot with a little, once again. But I would say that it was more extreme during the actual development and everything, and currently it's been just slightly laid back, simply because I'm in that ideation. I'm doing the list of the next prototype and game that I'm building and such, and so because I need to be crystal clear, I can't attempt to start writing a prototype without knowing exactly what the endpoint is going to be. So once that ideation process is done, then I'm going to say, okay, now let's take another step back. Is this going to take 3 or maybe 5 months, right? And then if that's the case, I'm going to have to reselect all the habits that I'm going to do and such. But then also, I would argue, the longer the development processes and everything, you would probably want to have just slightly more relaxed habits and such, simply because burnout is actually a real thing, and I'm not going to deny that. And it's so funny because after Dodge King was released, I remember just doing patches. Fun fact, and this is a little embarrassing, but when I launched the game, I accidentally uploaded it with the playtester 100% save file, meaning as soon as you opened it, you had everything. And so I remember, okay, I got to go ahead and just remove that. And when I removed it, the game crashed every single time you open it. And I was okay, something went wrong. So I had to redo the save system and such. And I remember, because I had the habits already, it wasn't, I launched the game, now I can relax. No, it's I'm constantly just working on that. And so I think that's and also, that's why it's called habits as well, right? It's habitual. It's something that you do over and over and over again. And so, like I said, right now, while I do have my next prototype almost planned out, while I do have actual prototypes ready, right? Because I talked about Another Chance was another game that I had, and technically that's all done. And also, one more tip that I heavily advertise in my channel is, hey, if you have assets, if you have systems, if you have things that you already structurally programmed from your other games, what is stopping you from copying and pasting it into the next one, right? Now, obviously, you want to do maybe a visual overhaul. You probably want to change it up so that, some players are like, oh, this is copy paste. Like, no, it doesn't have to be hyper copy paste, right? But the idea is like that's going to save you so much time. And so the interesting thing about, for example, Another Chance is, again, it is a twin stick shooter, but it uses a grid system. It's a roguelike, so it uses the upgrade system. It has a lot of overlapping characters from Dodge King, so that could also be recycled. So I can foresee that project can be done relatively way more quickly than I expected, simply because I completed Dodge King, and I completed Dodge King to the point where I can just literally strip down the systems that I have, move it over, and then we're set. Now, I'm not going to start that until one endpoint is completed. Fine, like I need to actually know, do I need the system? Do I not need the system? I'm going to discuss with my playtesters, friends, family, people online, like, hey, like, what would you like to see? What don't you want to see? If for players that did play Dodge King, if I told you, hey, we're going to change the grid system to this, would you approve of that? Would you disapprove? Have that conversation. So now, like, normal day and everything, right, is like, hey, I go to work. As soon as I clock out and everything, I'm just either working on my YouTube channel, I'm working on fixing the list, talking to my playtesters. Actually, and so I'm going to discuss something else in the next topic here in a second, so remind me about that for a sec, because I really do think that the validation process of making sure that your idea weighs so much more in your decisions, right? Not only do you want to have an idea that actually works out, that people want to play and everything, but it's so important to determine that way before you even prototype or playtest anything, because, you're going to be spending the next 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 months on that project, and you want to make sure that it's actually validated, right? But yeah, so like I said, what do I do? What's my day today, right? I go to work, or rather, I wake up at like 4 or 5 a.m. in the morning whenever my internal clock naturally wakes me up, hop on the computer, keep working on that list, keep doing the validation process, keep working on the YouTube channel. I have a bunch of videos that are ready. I just haven't published just yet because strategy stuff, whatever. And, once I've established that endpoint, that's when I'm going to determine, okay, how long do I need it? What are the, how long is it going to take to actually develop and everything? Call my beloved ones and say, hey guys, it's been great. Peace out. And then just triple down and continue, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's right now more relaxed and everything. But during the actual sprint, that's where things have to be hyper serious and such. Mm-hmm. And like I said, the longer the sprint, you kind of want to like relax that just a bit more. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'll talk about the validation stuff in a second, but is there a question that you had with that?
No, go for it.
Okay, so there's an experiment that I'm kind of running right now. And so the one thing that I really want to put forth on my channel is that I only talk about proof that I have, right? So I can't tell you, oh yeah, let's do this because this is going to... No, until I can tell you for sure, oh, this is something that works, then I'm not going to talk about it, right? But one thing that I've learned...
You call it integrity in development.
Correct,
yeah.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And so, and this is also funny because, fun fact, I didn't use the word motivation in the past 3 videos because... We're not so, like, I understand why motivation might be like a powerful thing because it's like, yeah, like you're motivated to work, but like the moment you rely on motivation, everything becomes such a struggle because once that is missing, then your fuel to work and everything is just gone. Mm-hmm. And so you really want to kind of stray away from that. And so the reason why I talk about integrity a lot, or like why I'm trying to like demonstrate, hey, integrity, is because if I can't prove the result, I don't have the proof or credibility to talk about it, therefore I shouldn't talk about that. So this is why I'm saying, oh yeah, this is an experiment and everything, but this is something I've been testing recently, and I think this is kind of like a little crazy, but I recently made a fake Steam page, like a Photoshop Steam page and everything, and all I've been doing as well, which is also part of the validation process of how do I set my endpoints, is I'm making these fake screenshots to make sure that, hey, is this new game idea something that you're going to like? And it's interesting because when I sent this to my playtesters, some people had some really strong feelings. Some people had some really neutral feelings, and others were like, oh, whatever. But what's interesting about this is that I really believe that in order to, like convert games, sell games, do all these things, it really comes down to the appeal. And so you can make a game that's replayable, you can make a game that's really fun, you can make a game that does all these things, but you also have to work on the appeal factor. And so it's difficult for me to tell you, hey, make a game quickly, and then during that process, you're going to find something appealing. No, maybe, like you said, maybe I might work on something and it just might not be fun. I might find that micro optimization during the development and that'll help me reach my goal and such. But what is stopping you from doing the micro optimizations before the game even starts? So what is stopping you from making a fake Steam page, putting fake screenshots, getting the vibe of like, hey, do you like the title? Do you like the blurb? Do you like the what you're seeing? And then from there, based off of everyone's reaction, you can say, okay, wait a minute, they like this, they dislike that. Suddenly, you now have a new tool to keep making your list even more sharp and everything, but more importantly, a list that is more appealing for players to actually pick up on. And so that's something that's actually what I'm using my time for right now, and I'm just constantly going back and forth with that loop of like, okay, I need to get the feedback, I need to make sure it's good, what works, what doesn't, what character designs work, what character designs don't work, and I might make a video on that soon actually, so that's probably why I'm teasing this a little bit more, but I think that's a really interesting process, and I'm telling you right now, it's saving a bunch of time of what ideas actually work and don't work. So always make sure to validate your work no matter what, but you can take a little extreme step by photoshopping a Steam page and seeing how people react to it. I think that's a really good strategy that we should try out more often.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I have been on my own discovery journey in a very similar vein. I hadn't thought about using Steam pages specifically, but I have a video that's going live on Monday that'll be in the past once this podcast goes live, but
Got it.
It's about why prototyping is important and how other successful developers have done prototyping successfully and use that to orient themselves in which project to move forward with. And one of those examples is, I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTube channel Isto Games. Steven and their team developed Atrio, and he has this really great video where he has 3 distinct game ideas that he didn't even do anything in engine or anything. He just made 3 pitch decks and kind of photoshopped some ideas on top of images and kind of spliced stuff together. And then he pitched those 3 ideas to streamers. So that was smart for a couple of reasons. One, he didn't do anything in engine, so he saved a ton of time on trying to prove out the concept. And 2, he pitched it to streamers who are people who play video games all day, and so their opinions are going to be a lot more valuable than probably other game developers. And so
absolutely.
And so I think that's such good advice that I don't see a lot of people taking. And like the people who I had on the first episode of this podcast, Toby from Square Glade Games and their game Outbound. Outbound originated as a artistic prototype where it was just like a short video or like a screenshot, and it was just like a van in the woods, and that was like all they posted, and they just wanted to see how people reacted to it, and it was super positive. And so I think that validating that using like social media is super, super important, but using Steam specifically is also a very interesting thing. So what are you measuring, like wish lists at that point, or how are you using Steam specifically to do that?
Yeah, so keyword Photoshop the Steam page. So it's not that it's actually like on Steam.
Yes.
Because if we were to do that, I would believe that we have to make like multiple deposits, right? Like, what do you call it? You open the Steam page, right, and then like you have to.
Yeah, it's like $100 every time. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So a little expensive, right? But the idea is you Photoshop it, and then what I do with my playtesters is like, hey, like, what do you think about this idea?
Yeah.
I remember posting it in my group. This game doesn't exist. What do you think about it? And then they read the title, they saw the screenshots, they saw the blurb, and they're like, oh, I really like this. But the crazy part too is one commenter said, I don't know what the genre is. And I was like, okay, cool. So now I know that whatever I'm delivering isn't aligned with the actual vision that I have, so I have to go back to the drawing board and keep doing that. So exactly like you mentioned, you can definitely post this on social media. You can definitely go ahead. The stream, actually, I'm going to have to think about that now. The streamer part is such a critical thing because I do recognize that contacting streamers is kind of like a difficult thing to do when you lack that appeal. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really strong metric because if the streamer kind of like side dishes their entire schedule and is like, no, I want to try this. Wait, it doesn't exist? Okay, then yeah, you have something that's pretty important and everything. Mm-hmm. And so obviously you want to have something appealing so that it's sellable and marketable and everything. But this also comes back to time management as well because now I'm not wasting time with the next project that I'm doing as a whole. Mm-hmm. So I really do think it's a great time investment to do those pitch decks to try to Photoshop the Steam page, see everyone's opinion and such. I'm definitely going to have to go ahead and reach out to some streamers. So I'm definitely going to take that advice because that's really fire. And absolutely, yeah, I think that's something that should be focused on a little more before any endeavor that you focus on and such, because ultimately you want to sell games, right? You want to make it marketable. You want to make sure that you have some profitability and success and everything. So definitely that's something that I'm currently working on, and I'm going to go ahead and take your advice with that because that sounds super cool.
Totally. I have another question that basically, I was really interested in this concept that you put forward in one of your videos about internal steam. And I just want to give you the chance to kind of talk about what is internal steam and why is it important for game developers.
So internal steam was actually talked about by Masahiro Sakurai himself. And I remember watching the video just randomly and I was like, this is the most revolutionary thing I've ever heard in my life. And it's super simple because in practice, it's frustrating. And so one thing that I think is really funny is that, we talk about motivation, we talk about like the emotional part of like, hey, you're a human, you have necessities, you have things that you have to deal with and such. And what's interesting is that as developers, one thing that we tend to not want to hold on to is, frustration, boredom, like all these negative things, right? The beauty about internal steam is that you're purposely frustrating yourself. And so that's going to be like not your source of fuel, but an extra source of fuel that you use in order to keep developing. So imagine you have this amazing game that you're building. You probably have like this whole empire of developers working on it. It's going to be like the greatest game of the year, the greatest game of the decade. But you can't tell anybody. As a human, right, like we're very social creatures, we like talking, we like sharing a lot of things and such. And so if I'm working on this grand project and I can't tell you the name of it, what it does, this and that, I'm going to feel like this level of frustration. And what happens is that negative emotion compels you to say, okay, how do I get rid of it? In order to get rid of the negative emotion, you share what you're talking about. But paradoxically, if you share what you talk about, you're going to stop making progress on that because psychologically, for some reason, and I forgot where, but there's a whole study on this, where literally when you share like a secret, the compellingness or the novelty of the secret kind of like washes away just a little bit. So the interesting thing is if you're working on a game and you're dying to tell somebody, I'm going to tell you right now, bro, hold on. Like, don't say anything. Because that part of you saying like, oh, well, I want to share, hold on. And the crazy part is you do this so that you continue to compel making progress. You keep working on your game. You keep doing what you got to do. And as much as you want to share, you have to remind yourself the reward of you sharing comes after you actually complete the endeavor. Because after that, okay, yeah, it's fine to share. You got to obviously got to do your marketing. You got to do this. You got to do that. But the earlier you share, the more, again, the novelty wears away, and then that internal like pressure of you trying to make the game kind of just settles down and such. And so I guess like one more thing to relate this to is that in the 90-day sprint, remember I used the word hermit. I was a hermit in the sense that I'm like in the room, I'm like working on my stuff, I'm trying not to socialize, not to hang out. And I remember getting messages from some friends, right, where like, hey, like what are you working on, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm just busy, I'll get back to you later. And like, no, like what are you actually working on? I'm like, and I'm trying so hard not to say anything because I'm like, if I tell you guys, then I'm just gonna get lazy, and I gotta not do that. So I kind of remember dodging the bullet a little bit, just like, just don't worry, we'll talk about it later. Ice cream Thursday, that 1.5 hour, right? Okay. And even then, when I was there, I didn't actually talk about it. But yeah, internal steam from Masahiro Sakurai. In summary, what he basically says is, hey, like, stay frustrated and use that frustration to just keep going. The reward of getting rid of the frustration is you actually telling the player. So make sure that when you tell them, it's actually completed, and that way it's just another extra push that you have to keep going further with your development. And it's super powerful. It's really underrated as well. Like I love yapping about my stuff, but there's times where I have to be quiet. And it's funny because I'm telling you about the screenshot, the Photoshop Steam page, but I didn't tell you what the game is and everything. So I'm kind of just like, oh well, I can't go into detail with that just yet.
Yep.
But,
yep.
So
that's so
because I can. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So I wanted to ask you, you did this 90-day experiment where you're trying to really maximize your game development potential. You hermit yourself in your room. You're trying to really figure out what is feasible in terms of putting out a good quality game in a reasonable amount of time. And you did it. Was it a financial success for you? Was it kind of a letdown? Are you going to do another tight deadline for your next game? Do you think that a 90-day cadence for developing and putting out games is sustainable? Like what did you learn from it overall, and what are you going to do moving forward?
Absolutely. So what I find interesting is, unironically, it was actually profitable. And the craziest part about this is because this is the deluxe version, yes, the game was made completely from scratch. I did this 90 days, but I used the same Steam page. And so the crazy part about that is you're not marketing, and in a way, I'm basically posting the game on a dead page because let's be real, the first game came out a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, and yeah, it didn't sell that much. It wasn't that good, you know. It had probably like maybe like 100, maybe 200 wish lists and such, but right now it's sitting at like when I launched the game, it was sitting at 450 wish lists, which I thought was really interesting and everything. And honestly, I do think that YouTube does play a little role of this. I recognize that my channel is for developers, so I'm not expecting them to like go ahead and play it and everything. But the thing that I learned about this is that, one, hey, wait a minute, this is a dead page, yet it still made money. And so what really like shocks me is that, okay, it really comes down to the compellingness and the appeal of the actual game as a whole. And so I can't, like I said, I can't tell you, oh, buy this game because just buy it. No, like it has to be appealing. It has to have actual player feedback and such. So one, it was launched on a dead page, which is weird. Two, I didn't market it at all. Like maybe I made like one or two tweets, which Twitter's like the worst place to market your game and everything. You're way better off on streamers or in festivals. And the only time I mentioned the game is literally like when I put it in a clip in my channel where I'm like, oh, well, this is the game I made. That's probably like all the exposure that I have to it. And yet, you know, that still allowed me to gain some sales and such. I have been reaching out to streamers recently just to see like, hey, how would that look like and such. But I actually haven't had any. I started the process probably like 2 days ago and such. So like, I'm still waiting for the results to be like, okay, how many people respond? How do I actually get these downloads and such? But again, no marketing, no dead page, no marketing, and made in 90 days, still profitable. So what I learned and what I really want to like focus on now going forward is, again, work on the appeal of the game, because the more exciting it looks like, the more compelled the player says, this looks cool, I want to check it out, then yeah, go for it. The second thing is I also made a video called replayability is like, or you should make a roguelike, or like why replayability is super important. But the crazy part is, and this is something that I kind of learned coming from my other playtesters, is that when you make a game that's extremely replayable, what happens is that you're naturally creating the ability for players to have like more time, specifically more hours in their session of playing the game. And what happens is indirectly, you're basically making them play your game for like maybe a month, 2 months, 3, like kind of like a part of their life. Subconsciously, what happens is, again, we're social creatures, we like talking, right? So what happens is when you're talking to your friends, hey, what game have you been playing recently? Oh, I've been playing this game. Suddenly, you just artificially created word of mouth. So what I really want to focus on is the next game that I work on, I want to make sure that it has replayable features to increase the probability of making sure that, hey, like players have the ability to have word of mouth to other players and such, and then combine that with something that's really appealing, and maybe you're going to have more of a commercial success going forward. That's my observations. That's what I've been seeing. And the reason why I mentioned this specifically is because there were a handful of players that said, hey, I told my friend about the game and they actually got it and this and that. And I said, oh, this is really cool, but like, what compelled you to do that? And they're like, oh, I was just playing the game over and over, and like, I just kind of mentioned it on a lunch, and I was like, So little interesting there, right? Now, is 90 days sustainable and such? I really do think so. I can't give a full answer here because, again, I did not pre-market. I did not hyper advertise. I didn't like go for the wish list, because I do recognize that in Steam you want to have like a high level of wish list velocity. You want to have these factors that allow you to have a successful launch, and then as a result, you know, if you have a high wish list rate or high wish list in general, you launch, you know, Steam sends the emails to the players, and then you're probably going to convert way more. So I don't have the data to tell you like, oh, like do this, do that, because on the first Dodge King, like I said, I had 100, maybe 200 wish lists, and so, you know, barely did any conversions. But in the deluxe version, where no marketing, dead page, all of these negative factors, I still made money, and which again, I think that's really insane. So my next game, replayable, attractive, appealing, all of that. It will have pre-marketing. It will have more efforts to, you know, get more exposure and such. That's the goal. That's what I'm aiming for and such. But as the developer, really focus on those key things: the replayability, the appeal, and lastly, it doesn't matter how much time it takes to make the game. I'm just saying that if you want to do it quickly, if you want to do it you can do your dream game in a month if you wanted to, but that means you probably need a lot of developers, you probably need a lot of resources, you probably, you know, there's ways to optimize no matter what. If you're alone, yeah, you could do 90 days. Maybe you might need 6 months, and that's fine. But all this stems down to how you're willing to apply yourself, because there is like this little discipline fact of like, are you willing to make those sacrifices and those trades to, you know, allocate those resources, that time, that money, that energy. And really just, it comes down to what do you actually need?
Yep.
Like, what do you really refer to that list one more time? Is that actually super necessary? And one last thing real quick before I forget, but that process actually, and I completely forgot to mention this, but that process is called via negativa. And it's basically Latin for, hey, like, subtract until there's nothing. And so sometimes we want to have these like dream games that have 50 billion features, but if I asked you, for example, hey, Vampire Survivors, right? Like, that was super viral and everything. What is the core gameplay? You walk around, you automatically shoot things, and there's a lot of enemies, and then maybe some rewards. Those are 4 features. The game only needed 4 features to do what it needed to do, right? Now, if I ask you, like, a AAA game like Halo with, like, Forge where you can build, yeah, that's a different context and everything. Obviously, that's going to look different. But, if you took away all of those extra features, can Halo still be Halo? Can it just be a shooter and still be successful? Probably. And so, via negativa, reduce it until it's just what you actually genuinely need. And suddenly you're going to realize, oh, I don't need to work that much to do all these things. It's really not that many tasks that I have to deal with. So, little thing that I like to apply as well. So.
Yeah, that's super interesting. On a side note, I recently heard from somebody, I don't know if this is true, but somebody told me that the developer for Vampire Survivors had a history developing like slot machine games.
Correct.
Yeah, and so they kind of get the animations and dopamine hits that make those kinds of rewards compelling, which I think is really interesting too.
Absolutely.
The kind of the last question that I have that I wanted to bring up with you is just kind of your general view of motivation and discipline. I know you've kind of abstained from using the word motivation, but I'm interested because I feel like a lot of people, when they try and apply themselves to get something done, and specifically for game development, I see some people overemphasize motivation and some people overemphasize discipline. I don't know if they're opposites, but I'm interested to hear how you kind of think about those two things.
See, this is interesting. So I might need like a couple of seconds here to gather my thoughts, because how I see it, because I do have an answer, but I'm trying to see how I formulate this, right? Because I really think that okay, so motivation, the problem or the thing about motivation is that it can be anything. And this is beautiful, right? It could be, hey, you are a father. Like, that's super important, which means you have to make sure that no matter what happens, you have to really be profitable. You have to really make sure that every decision you do going forward supports your family, your child, your wife, all of these aspects, right? And so that level of motivation may be different from somebody else who says, oh, I just want to make like a really good game at the end of the day. I don't really care about anything else. And so kind of like game dev, it is subjective. And so the reason why that could be a problem is simply because, like, we don't really know what is once using the word peak, right? We don't know what is the peak definition, because if we had peak motivation to do something, then that should be like our North Star of like, oh yeah, we have to go here all the time. However, again, as humans, it is important to really recognize that there are reasons why we do the things that we do. I personally do game dev because I absolutely enjoy it, right? I would love to be, successful and stable enough to say, oh, you know what, I want to make this a full career and everything. So you could say that's an intrinsic motivation and such. And I'm not going to deny that, yeah, that's something that maybe a lot of developers also relate to and think about, and there's nothing wrong with that. The reason why I put discipline first over everything else is because just like working out, just like with any harsh thing in life that can be thrown at you, there's going to be moments where you just kind of don't want to do it. You're just like, well, if I have to code today, then I'll have to, but like once you truly like double down on really doing the work that is required of you, no matter what condition goes on, you become a powerful person. And so I genuinely think that the most powerful people in the world are just the people that can do the things that are asked of them to do, regardless of how they feel. This isn't to dismiss emotions, how you feel, because again, we're gonna need breaks, we're gonna need our time. We're not robots. We're not here to make games 24/7 either, right? Like, we have there's family that we have to take care of. There's love interest that we have to move on with our lives and such. We probably want to hang out with our friends. We probably want to travel the world. Like, there's so much more beyond the scope of game development besides the actual coding and such. Like, that's absolutely a lot that you can do. What I do say is that maybe it should be merited or noted that if you're a person that can really develop the discipline of just making sure that you can do whatever needs to be done, no matter what, that's honestly just going to propel you to do anything in life. And so I'm talking about game dev and everything, right? But like, I remember there's times where it's like, context, right? Like super funny, but hey, when I quit my job at the nuclear power plant and, I'm doing game dev for the first time, terrible decision, don't ever do that, right? I realized like, hey, I'm running out of savings and everything, but also fun fact, I was supporting my parents. And so suddenly I have the whole financial burden and everything. And I'm like, wait a minute, I gotta make sure that I'm successful enough to make sure that they're fine and that I can take care of myself. Launch the game, crickets, nothing, just, and I'm like, okay, so what I do? I'm going to put the game in the portfolio. I'm going to get a job, do what I have to do. Cool. Mm-hmm. And then I loved working for the game studio. I think it's one of the greatest experiences I've ever had. But there's a moment where I realized, like, hey, like, I need to be a little bit more financially stable for my endeavors and such. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into software engineering. Context. Besides the first time programming in Unity after quitting my nuclear power plant, I never touched code. Like, I'm still learning code. Like, I'm literally, like, I'm not a coder. Like, don't have, do you know what this syntax is? I probably don't. Okay, I'm going to be honest with you. But the thing is, like, these are the decisions that we have to make no matter what. And so, yeah, there's going to be rewards and plays and risks and, sacrifices with all these things. But it just comes down to, who is around you? Who do you care about? Who are you going to protect? Are you going to be strong enough to make sure that what you actually attribute, is that going to be enough for everyone else around you? And so, one last little detail, like, I'm a very family-oriented person, as you probably heard and everything. I absolutely love the fact that, you are a father, you have a wife, you have children and everything, and I can only imagine the sheer motivation you have to just continue doing the best possible effort possible, because you want to make sure that, again, your success goes to them, because to you, that's your purpose, right? That's probably the thing that matters the most. And so, it really comes down to the purpose-basedness of everything. You can be motivated by whatever. Can you be strong enough to do the things that you have to do, whether you want to or not? That's discipline. And so I wouldn't say it's motivation versus discipline. I wouldn't say one is better than the other. I'm simply saying that strength comes from doing the things that are difficult. Mm-hmm. If you can do that consistently, you should be set. And I'm telling you right now, hey, and you probably know this, I think game dev's kind of hard. Like, it's fun, it's great, but a little difficult. But that's okay. That's part of the challenge, and that's a challenge I'm willing to take. Yeah,
that's awesome. That's all the questions that I had for you. So I'll just open it up. If there's anything else that you want to talk about, or we can wrap things up, whatever.
I think we can wrap things up, but again, I'm just super genuinely curious about one last thing here, and it's more about like the porting process. Like, that's such an interesting thing, because you're absolutely, and I saw the video of you porting, right, and you're absolutely right, because it just adds credibility as a developer at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's the financial rewards, there's learning, and so you can continue porting going forward and such, but like, that has to be like such an insane process and such, and so I know there's NDA, there's this, there's that, but like, what is like your actual honest thoughts about like porting your game in general, like? Because I think that's important, but I kind of want to hear a little bit from you. Like, what's your experience with it? How do you view it? What things should I be aware about for developers that want to try to get into porting before they, commit to that?
Totally, yeah. Porting games to consoles is difficult, rewarding, semi-lucrative, and very, very fulfilling, I think. Because I'm actually not much of a Steam player. I consume all of my game media on consoles. And so seeing my own games on there, I think, is a very fulfilling thing, and it just adds so much credibility to what I'm doing. And I will say it's not easy, and it's not it's very time intensive. So also, I talked about this in my video. You need a dev kit. Depending on every platform, you need a dev kit. Some you need to pay for, and some you get for free, and it's not cheap. And so having that capital is important. But really, I think the key thing is that you have to be able to kind of go head over heels into documentation and just kind of like flounder and be really self-taught. If you're somebody who needs like a very direct tutorial and hand-holding, then I think it's going to be really difficult for an individual to port their own games to consoles. But if you have the wherewithal to kind of click around different dashboards and read documentations and forums and see what other questions have been asked, and kind of click around all the different configurations, and be willing to be stuck on why a build is failing for a couple of days, and it works on your computer, but once you put it on the dev kit, it's having issues, all of this different stuff, and then failing the QA process. There's a lot of difficulty that goes along with it, but I think it's super fun. I have a lot of data. Every month at the first of the month, I go in and I check all of my sales data, and I have it in this big spreadsheet. And I wish I didn't have the NDAs, because it'd be something super fun to share on my YouTube channel. But it's interesting to see the trends for some consoles have very big launches, and some have little launches but longer tails, and some sale events do better than others. So it's like there's all these different things, like revenue wise, to take into account. But in general, I think it's awesome. I have like a bucket full of all these different controllers for all my different dev kits and stuff, and I bought like a little HDMI channel changers that I can just be like, okay, go to my PS4 dev kit, go to my Nintendo Switch dev kit, and just like flip between them and try my different builds and stuff. And it's a really cool tool to add to my developer tool belt. So
that sounds super amazing and honestly super fun.
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
I can see the technical part being like, the struggle and such. But again, that's why we're developers. We learn. We have to get on the spot. We have to do what we have to do here. So
yeah, exactly.
Something that I'm personally looking forward to do one day in the future. Hopefully.
Yeah, if you ever have any questions, reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you out.
I appreciate
one of the things that was really cool for me just recently is I'm wrapping up everything for my game Bridges and Docks to launch on Nintendo Switch. And I passed lot check. The build is ready to go. I'm preparing all of the store assets still and finalizing what I want to be the launch date and stuff. I'm still trying to figure out. But putting together the trailer for the store page, and like you have to add the little mnemonic for the Nintendo Switch at the beginning, for the store page. And it's like so weird to see like the Nintendo Switch logo, and it's like, and then it like goes into my trailer, and I'm like, whoa, that's so surreal. So
you're an official developer. That's crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that has to be super exciting to see, honestly. Like I would feel fulfilled. That would be insane.
Totally. Cool. Well, Edward, it's been a blast. Thank you for coming on to this podcast. I'll leave some links in the description so that people can check out your game and your YouTube channel. But is there anything else that you want to plug where people can follow what you're doing?
I think those would be enough. There's Twitter and other sites, but I'll send those links as well if that's something that we can keep adding.
Yep,
but honestly, huge thank you for having me here. This was such a great opportunity, super exciting. And again, just thank you so much for allowing me to share my tips, my advice, hearing more from you on your end, and just, having this opportunity to talk. It's been absolutely amazing.
Totally. Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and I hope that we can stay in touch too.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right, we'll see you later.
All right, take care.